Quiet on set. Picture is up. All right, roll sound.
Rolling.
Roll cameras.
Cam's rolling.
And 3, 2.
Hey everybody, what's going on? And welcome to Hank's Think Tank. It's a Tuesday morning, and we're getting closer and closer and closer to the election, and you can kind of feel it start to build. And I think these local elections are really, really important. This is something that we can control as voters in our area. It's hard to control what's going on federally, and I know I've said that a lot of times. But I'm not going to judge anybody. I'm going to leave the judging up to Kent Chambers. And he's the guy we've got in today. And he is a Republican running for the Ninth Court of Appeals. And so I'm going to give him an opportunity to introduce himself. If you haven't met this guy yet, I like him. He's an interesting person. He's a great Republican and conservative guy. And has got some good values. He's got a great family. And welcome aboard, Kent Chambers. How's it going this morning, man?
Well, thanks for having me. It's going great. We're in the midst of this election season. It's a lot of work, and it's very rewarding work. So I am a conservative Christian Republican running for the Ninth Court of Appeals. There are two Republicans in the race.
Okay.
No Democrat is going to be on the ticket. So the March 5th primary is going to determine the election. There will be no runoff because there's only two of us involved.
Right.
So I went to Baylor University, graduated in '87. I went to Baylor Law School, started law school when I was 20. I turned 21 the next day, but I was 20 when it started.
That's awesome.
And graduated when I was 23, and I got a job in Beaumont, Texas at a law firm. By that point, I was married. I got married when I was 20, so we've been married 38 years. We have 4 daughters.
Wow.
We have 10 grandchildren, and most all of us live in Willis. I have one daughter that lives in Conroe with her family. And we've been in Montgomery County for about 17 years. So I started the first half of my legal career in Beaumont, and the second half of my legal career has been in Montgomery County.
Yeah.
Almost exactly equal. So I've been a lawyer for almost 35 years now.
Okay.
I am board certified in personal injury trial law. There's a little over 100,000 lawyers in the state of Texas. Only 6% of them are board certified in any area of specialty. And there's a lot of different areas of specialty.
And why is that? I've always been curious as to why that is.
That's a good question. For me, I didn't seek board certification until I had been a lawyer for probably, I'd say, 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
One reason is when I took the bar exam, which was 2.5-day exam, after school, that many years of school and all those tests, I'm like, I'm done. Never
Right.
taken another test.
I'll bet.
But I decided after about 20 years in, when circumstances arose that I was back on my own as a solo lawyer, I thought for marketing purposes it might be good if I could say I was board certified in personal injury trial law.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided to go through that process. It's a little bit of a process. You have to, for my area of specialty, you have to devote X percent. I forget what it is. It's like either 25 or 30% of your practice has to be in that specialty.
Okay.
Then you have to list not all of your trials, but at least like the last 5 years, every case you tried,
Okay.
and who the lawyers were and who the judges were. And they contact them, and they send them a questionnaire that asks about your competence, your abilities, your ethics, your honesty, and things like that. And you have to pass that vetting process, and it's done by the people that you were up against, not the ones on your side,
Yeah.
the ones that you fought against.
It's as tough as the bar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you take a one-day test that covers a gamut of topics from beginning to end on personal injury in particular. So anyway, only 1% of the lawyers are board certified in personal injury trial law. I'm one of those.
That's a rigorous vetting process, and
Yes.
I think that's probably the reason why.
Right.
You know?
And, doctors, it seems like most of them do become board certified in a particular area.
Mm-hmm.
But you think about it, you go to your heart doctor, or you go to your internal medicine doctor, or you go to your,
Right.
ear, nose, and throat doctor. It kind of just lends itself to specialization, whereas the practice of law, like I'm board certified in personal injury, but I have a wide array of civil cases.
Okay.
So, yeah, it helps marketing in that area, but I still do a lot more. Whereas with doctors, you're not going to go to your ear, nose, and throat doctor and ask him to, test your heart.
Right.
But with a board certified trial lawyer, you might still go to them and say, "Hey, would you probate this will?" So, anyway, I am board certified. There's, like I said, 1% of the lawyers are board certified in personal injury law. I'm one of them. Justice Hollis Horton, who's currently on the Court of Appeals, he's one of them.
Okay.
And he's retiring. And so that's the spot that we're seeking to fill. There's 4 judges on the Beaumont Court of Appeals. Any case that goes up there, you get 3 of those judges that decide your case, so it can't end up being a tie.
Okay.
And he's retiring. None of the guys or ladies, none of the judges were appellate specialists. It's just not a prerequisite to be an appellate judge that you are an appellate specialist. So most of the judges that are currently on the court, out of all 4 of them, 3 of them were civil litigators, which is what I do, and 1 did half criminal, half civil.
Okay.
So anyway, that's a little bit about board certification.
Yeah, and so what type of cases go to this appeals court that you're running for? So would it be civil? Would it be criminal? What would it
It's everything that ends up being disposed of in the trial courts across 10 counties in southeast Texas.
Jeez.
Any kind of case. Literally.
So it's the full gamut.
The only thing that doesn't go to the
Wow.
Court of Appeals is capital murder,
Okay.
death penalty. That goes straight to Austin.
Okay.
So if someone's convicted and they get the death penalty, they appeal, they go to the Court of Criminal Appeals, which sits in Austin. We have 2 high courts in Texas. They're both in Austin. One is the Court of Criminal Appeals. It is the court of last resort
Okay.
for criminal. And then we have the Texas Supreme Court that's the court of last resort for everything else. One step below that is what we call the intermediate appellate courts.
Okay.
There's 14 of those. We have 14 geographic districts in the state of Texas. Southeast Texas happens to be District 9, and so
Okay.
I'm running for the 9th District Court of Appeals.
Right.
And they handle, and below that is the trial courts, the district courts, the county courts at law, and things like that. So if you have a family law case or a civil case or a criminal case and someone's dissatisfied with the outcome, when they appeal it, the Court of Appeals has to hear that case and make a decision. Once they make a decision and they write that opinion, if someone's still dissatisfied, they can appeal to Austin, but they have discretion whether or not they even hear the case.
Right.
They only take probably less than 10% of the cases. The other ones, they just say, not important to Texas jurisprudence. So what that means is the courts of appeals are usually the last say in any particular case, statistically. It's either going to be the trial court
Right.
outcome and nobody appeals, but if they do appeal, the likelihood is the last word on that's going to be the Court of Appeals. That's why it's important. So if you have a lawsuit, either for or against you, or you're in a criminal case, or you're a victim of a crime, or you have a family law case, if you don't feel like you got a fair shake at the trial court, you appeal to the Court of Appeals.
Right. And so appellate law is, I guess, a subset of its own. It seems like it would be.
Well,
You know, I know you still have to follow case law and everything else that goes into what would take place in a trial, but then there's also appellate law. So is there appellate case law as well that you guys have to?
yeah, so trial courts don't issue opinions. So when you go to trial, let's say you're in a car wreck, because it's a simple thing and everybody understands a car wreck, right? So you have a plaintiff suing a defendant, and
Right.
they go to trial, and they find the defendant 80% at fault, and they find the plaintiff 20% at fault, and they award $10,000 in damages. And then the judge gets that verdict form, and he says, okay, well, the plaintiff was, the 20% at fault, and the defendant's 80% at fault, so you get $8,000.
Okay.
And he issues he doesn't issue an opinion. He signs a judgment that says the defendant shall pay the plaintiff $8,000. It doesn't have any explanations other than that's what the verdict was of the jury.
Okay.
But then when you appeal, if someone was to appeal that and say, well, maybe the plaintiff appeals it and says, I think the defendant was 100% at fault, and the jury got it wrong, or the defendant appeals and says, well, I wasn't allowed to introduce a photograph that I think would have shown, that I wasn't at fault. When that goes to the Court of Appeals, there is appellate law because there's other decisions across the state that are precedent, right?
Okay. Yeah.
But it's the substantive law. It's the same substantive law that applied in the trial court that judge is supposed to be following, right?
Okay.
And so you use other courts' appellate decisions, and the lawyers will use those, and they will write a brief and say, hey, in Smith versus Jones, X, Y, and Z happened, and Johnson versus Williams, this is how the court decided. In our case, it's more like Johnson versus Williams than it is Smith versus Jones. And then you write the lawyers write the brief, and the courts of appeals judges review all that, and they make a decision, and then they write their own opinion that becomes precedent.
Okay.
So there's not really an appellate law like you're saying. There are appellate rules of procedure, and they're actually pretty straightforward.
Okay.
And the justices need to have a working knowledge of them, but really the people that have to follow them is the lawyers that are filing their papers on time and meeting the deadlines and including all the things in their briefs that they're supposed to include. So the appellate rules are really pretty easily understood and pretty basic. It's the substantive law of negligence and proximate cause and damages and things like that all of us lawyers have to apply.
Right.
And I'd like to talk a little bit about my experience and how that kind of plays into it, this substantive law and learning the trial procedures, because it's an important aspect of what an appellate judge does.
Yeah, and I think that'll fold right into my next question, which is why you decided to run for this position.
Okay.
So, and then that'll give you an opportunity to bring that in too, I think.
Yeah. And I'm going to start kind of early because all of this is a process in my mind, right? Mm-hmm. So I always excelled at school, and I particularly excelled in science and math. I love those classes.
My kind of guy.
And so I was,
okay.
I was like, I didn't want to be an engineer. I decided I want to be a doctor because I thought that was what, if you're good at science and biology and chemistry and all that, that's what you do, right? And so I was going to be a doctor, and I go off to Baylor University, and I had gotten college credit from scoring high enough on the entrance exam, and so I didn't need to take the typical weed out classes because I had already got credits for them. And so I took things that I was going to need anyway. I took political science, I took economics, and I just got really interested in that stuff. I mean, I read Thomas Paine's Common Sense, and it just like
Common Sense was great.
Blew my mind, and I'm like, this is awesome. And I said, man, I'm thinking about, and Reagan was president. I loved Reagan, and I'm like, I want to do this. I want to be a lawyer. I've had people telling me for years, I just wasn't listening. You'd be a great lawyer. You make great arguments, And so I started doing that. And I had people going, yeah, but you're a Christian, man. Those lawyers, they're crooked, and they're
Not
dishonest.
all lawyers are crooked.
Yeah, but that's everybody's perception, right?
Right.
And so I decided I'm going to do this, and I'm like, I'm out to prove them wrong. I'm out to prove that, you can be a strong Christian and be ethical and moral and honest and still be a successful lawyer.
Sure.
So I go to law school, I get out, we move to Beaumont, and I'm a conservative Republican, and I moved to Beaumont. It is 100% Democrats. I mean,
really?
Every single position in Jefferson County was a Democrat position. The judges were all Democrats. It was known as the lawsuit capital of the world. And I got a job with a firm where we defended the people that were being sued.
Okay.
So I told you I'm board certified in personal injury law.
Right.
I don't sue people. I'm the one that defends the people that are getting sued.
Okay.
So if you have a car wreck and someone sues you, one of these guys that advertises on TV or a billboard or something like that,
the Texas Hammer.
Yeah, one of those guys sues you.
Yeah.
Then I'm the lawyer I'm one of the guys that defends you.
Okay.
And I've been doing this for 35 years, and everybody I've defended, they're worried about losing their home,
Sure.
losing their 401k, because they're getting sued for millions of dollars
Right.
for something that
Money they don't have normally.
yeah, money they don't
Yeah.
have, and they have a little bit of insurance, but it's never enough.
Right.
And and so that's what I'm doing. When I was a young lawyer in Beaumont, that's what I'm doing. And so I'm kind of swimming against the current there.
Mm-hmm.
And I started trying cases as a young lawyer. And when, there's judges, I would just say, it's unfortunate, but judges are human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And some judges have agendas. And
Sure.
some judges have favorites. And some judges have relationships with other lawyers.
Humans,
And I
yeah.
quickly learned in the area that I was practicing geographically, as well as the type of law I was doing and the side that I was on, a lot of times the rulings were not in my favor.
Mm-hmm.
I want to introduce a piece of evidence. No. The other side wants to introduce a piece of evidence. Oh, sure, that could come in.
Yeah.
And so those things happen. First of all, Baylor Law School's the best law school in the state, so it really prepared me. But second of all, that kind of baptism by fire, being thrown into that environment and having things going against you, I had to know my stuff if I was going to
Sure.
win. And I did. I won 90% of my cases. And as a fourth-year lawyer, I decided I'm going to go out on my own.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been practicing for about 4.5 years. I'm 28 years old. I got 3 kids at home. And I didn't branch off with 2 or 3 other lawyers. I went out as a solo lawyer doing what I do.
Ballsy.
And a little bit.
Because you guys are limited in how you can
Yeah.
advertise and everything. So
Right.
yeah,
And
it's
for what
tough.
I do, you don't advertise. No one
Yeah.
goes,
Right.
have you been sued? Hire me.
Yeah.
You know where I get most of my business is from insurance companies.
Mm-hmm.
They send me work. And those guys are in the courtroom all the time watching their lawyers. And if
Sure.
they're not up to snuff, they're not going to send you any cases. So for me to do that and succeed was a big deal. Okay, because everybody was
Yeah, absolutely.
predicting my failure. People were wanting me to fail. I mean, it was bad. So, but I did succeed. I got busy enough where I hired another lawyer, Mitch Templeton, who I was friends with from the law firm that I worked at before. He came on board, then another one, and then another one. Before you know it, we had 10 or 11 lawyers, and the firm was known as Chambers, Templeton, Casciola, and Thomas. Now, over the years, Beaumont has changed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, a lot of counties have changed.
Oh,
where
yeah.
They're not dark blue anymore. Beaumont
Right.
is kind of a purple county. My former law partner, Mitch Templeton, is the first Republican ever to be elected as a district judge in Jefferson County, Texas.
Okay.
There was other Republican judges, but they were appointed and then got reelected. He ran for an open seat and he got it. And that was in 2018. And I'm like, wow, okay.
Mm-hmm.
My former partner, Steve Thomas, is a Republican judge up in Hardin County. And then we had an associate working for us named Gordon Freeze. He's now a Republican judge in Jefferson County. So I'm watching all these guys that joined my firm become judges. And it kind of rekindled that zeal I had way back in undergrad when Reagan was president and I was getting involved. And I'm like, I'm thinking I'm going to go conquer the world. And all those plans, I guess, got put on, or aspirations kind of had been on the back burner because of, raising a family and being very active in church
Sure.
and everything. I've always been someone that I have taken to heart the scripture passages about using your gifts.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I have, gifts that I can use, and I've always used them in church. And I've been in lay leadership positions, teaching Sunday school or singing in the choir or serving on the board of trustees or as a deacon,
Mm-hmm.
or, helping write the bylaws of the church, things like that, running the church business meetings. That's within my,
Right.
skill set. And just in the last several years, the timing has been more and more right for me to be more involved in the public realm and use my gifts in that realm. And I guess when COVID hit, and it wasn't so bad in Montgomery County, but there's a lot of places where they were shutting everybody down.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm watching TV and I'm like, these people are being put out of business by their government. Who is speaking up? Where is everybody saying this is unconstitutional?
Mm-hmm.
Where does it say in the United States Constitution, where does it give Congress or the president or some agency the right to just come in and issue decrees as if they were kings,
Mm-hmm.
and these governors just issuing decrees. Why isn't someone filing lawsuits and challenging this?
Right.
And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm just one voice here. What am I doing? And I finally was like, well, yeah, what are you doing? And so I decided, well, what can I do? And I turned back to those scriptures about using your gifts. And I'm like, what are my gifts?
Mm-hmm.
And what position in the government would I do best at? And it would be a judge. And specifically an appellate judge, because I have a vast knowledge of the law, and I feel like that's where I could have the greatest impact, because appellate courts make precedent. Like
Mm-hmm.
I said earlier, trial judges don't.
Right.
And so we need good trial judges. Don't get me wrong. And I
Mm-hmm.
think I'd make an excellent trial judge. But I think, and I'll get into this in just a second, my knowledge of how things go makes me uniquely qualified to serve as an appellate judge, because I've tried cases. I've tried about 150 cases in 65 different courts. That's just courts. Sometimes it's a different judge because people retire or get
Right.
win an election or lose an election.
Mm-hmm.
But I went through my list of trials when I was deciding to run, and I counted up all the different courts, 65 different courts. That probably means 70
That's a
to
bunch.
75 judges,
Yeah.
because you get different
Sure.
judges in there. 32 different counties. I know some lawyers that have tried more cases.
Yeah.
Okay, there's lawyers that have tried more
That's
cases.
still a very well-rounded
But
career.
I don't know people that have tried more cases in more counties and more courts than I have.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's some out there. I haven't met them. In addition to that, I've always been one to handle my own appeals.
Mm-hmm.
If I lose a case, which is rare, sorry, I've won about 90% of my trials, which doesn't just happen.
Mm-hmm.
Or if the other side appeals, or if there's a mandamus or an interlocutory appeal that needs to be filed, or a permissive appeal, I've done all that. So I've handled 35 to 40 appeals.
Okay.
And like I said, there's 14 districts. I've had appeals in 11 of those districts. If you just count the ones that issue an opinion, because sometimes appellate courts can deny a mandamus and it just says mandamus denied.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back and I looked up cases where opinions were issued in one of the cases that I was involved in as an appellate lawyer. 9 of the 14 appellate courts plus the Texas Supreme Court. So when you look at the body of experience with 150 trials, about 40 appeals across multiple counties, across multiple appellate courts, it gives me a wide lens of perspective. Because like I was talking about before, when you have judges or even appellate judges that have agendas or they have favorites,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to steer a case one way or steer a case another way, when you've tried a lot of cases and you've seen it all, like I
Mm-hmm.
have, it's easy to detect those things. And I think that if you don't have that experience, you might be just reading words on a page. Appellate
Right.
judges don't hear evidence. They read what the court reporter was over there typing up.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's literally words on a page. But when I do my appeals, or I'm defending one of my verdicts on appeal and I read the words on a page, I have a sense of what it means. And about a third of my appeals have been on cases that I wasn't the lawyer trying the case, where
Mm-hmm.
other lawyers have said, hey, I won this case, and now there's other sides appealing it. Would you write the brief? Would you handle the appeal? And when I read those words on the page, even though I wasn't at trial, I can envision what's happening in the courtroom because I've just been there
Right.
so many times. So that's why I'm running. I want to use the gifts that God gave me, the talents, the abilities. I've got the personality for it, and I've got the experience for it. And I don't want to be the guy who had all these abilities and then just didn't use them, right?
Yeah.
Like I said,
Yeah.
I've been using
I
them in
gotcha.
church, but I'm looking at this country and I'm saddened. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it makes me sad to see what's happening in the country. We've gone nuts.
I know.
And I think it can really be traced back to we've turned our back on God, and we've turned our backs on the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
The people don't know what the Constitution says, even though it's written in plain English, because they don't teach it to people. And the politicians don't adhere to the Constitution. And so
Right.
that's a bad combination. And so I'm sitting at home and I'm just like, and I've always been, I donate to Republican conservative candidates, but I haven't run because of the timing issue. The timing is right now, and I'm like, I want to be in the fight, and so I start thinking about this, and it's really just kind of on my heart for the last couple of years, and I start looking into it, and I start mentioning it to my family, and they're praying, and I'm reading the Bible, and I come across some things in Scripture because I was looking at Romans 12 where it talks about using your gifts, and the very last verse of Romans 12 says, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." And I think we've reached the point in our country where we're calling evil good and good evil. We don't know what a woman is. How can we know the difference between good and evil?
Yeah.
And so the very next verse, Romans 13:1 says, "Submit to earthly authority because there is no authority on earth except that which God established." Now, we didn't have chapters and verse numbers when Paul was writing this to the Romans. So why does he talk about using your gifts and then overcoming evil with good and then submitting to earthly authorities? And it just really, to me, it spoke to me and said, if we're going to overcome evil as a society, if we're going to overcome evil with good, we've got to have good and faithful servants that are willing to step up and be in those position of authorities whenever issues come up.
And do the right thing.
And do the right thing.
Right.
And so that's why I'm running. I mean, that describes, that really is the root of all of this. And I know it's a long story.
Here's the thing, though.
It's been a journey.
But here's the thing. I'll bet you I've asked 100 guys and girls why they're running. That's probably got to be the best explanation I've ever heard in my life as to why I'm running.
I'm a deep thinker.
Everybody always falls back to their campaign rhetoric. Well, I'm running because I want to ensure that the Constitution's upheld, and I wanted to. And I think that you went way past that. Hey, that's to me, it was great.
Well, thank you. It's a personal story because this has been a personal journey, and yes, I want to do all those things. I want to be in the fight, defending the Constitution and all that. We don't know what's going to come up. I think about Queen Esther in the Bible. She was in a position where the Jews were being persecuted, and her uncle came to her and said, "You need to talk to the king. Maybe it is that you were put in this position for such a time as this." We don't know what's going to come before the Ninth Court of Appeals. I can tell you a few years ago, the Kuntz cheerleaders in Hardin County wanted to have posters, those posters that the football players run through. Yeah. They wanted to put Bible verses on them. Who would have known that case would go through the state court system where they're trying to get their First Amendment constitutional rights to free speech and free religion, and that would go through the trial court in Hardin County, Texas, where my former law partner, Steve Thomas, was the judge, and he ruled in favor of the cheerleaders. Then that went up to the Beaumont Court of Appeals and eventually to the Texas Supreme Court, and they upheld the cheerleaders' constitutional rights. And I'm going, what's the next case that's going to come down the pipe?
Right.
And I want to be there. We have a good Court of Appeals now. It was not so great when I started my career, but it's flipped. And we have all Republican, conservative judges. I just want to keep it that way.
Okay. Yeah. Great. All right. Well, I'm gonna move a little bit forward here. So, and I wrote these out, so I'm just going to read them. It's kind of the role of a judge often involves interpreting laws and legal precedent. How do you approach this task, and what guiding principles do you adhere to in making legal decisions? And I know we just kind of covered that in a way, but I'd like to go over it again.
Sure. Well, the guiding principle for me is the Declaration of Independence. Most people would probably say the Constitution. In the Declaration of Independence, it says the government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. So that means that any law that is passed has to be consented to by the populace, right? And if it's a statute, it's going to be through their representatives by a majority vote, and it's got to be signed by the governor or the president, as the case may be.
Right.
But when it comes to the Constitution, 3/4 of the states have to ratify it, and the way they do that is the people have to vote. And so my guiding principle is this. What were the people who voted for it thinking when they voted for it? So back in 1787, when the states ratified the Constitution, or in 1789 when they ratified the Bill of Rights, or even in the 1860s when they amended the Constitution to add the 14th Amendment, which has equal protection and things like that in it. A lot of people talk about, well, we want to determine what was the original intent of the framers. And I follow more with what Justice Scalia did. He focused on what did the words mean to the ordinary person at that time.
So, yeah, but you're talking about representative government. We don't do that anymore.
Yeah, I know, unfortunately. But basically, for me, you look at the words that were used and you say, what would that have meant to an ordinary person back in 1789 when they passed the Bill of Rights? Because those are the ones who consented to it. And we consent by not amending it, right? So so even though they were the ones who originally consented to it, unless and until we amend something or revoke it, then we're consenting to it. So you go back to what that original, everybody talks about original intent. I like to talk about original consent. And you say, what did those words mean to those people? And that's what it means. You don't insert things, you don't take things out. And the same is true with statutes.
Legal purity. That's really what it is.
Yeah. So the same thing when the legislature passes a statute and a case comes before the court, I would follow the same approach. What did this statute mean to, if it was passed last year, it's pretty easy to in modern language, and we go, what would this mean to the ordinary person? Not some scholar, not some, legislator. What did it mean to the people? And that's my approach. And I think it's improper. It's tyranny to legislate from the bench.
Right.
Because that's not the court's role.
Right.
I got asked a question last night at one of the forums about the independence of the judiciary. How do we maintain the independence of the judiciary or something? I said, well, let me tell you something. I hear this phrase all the time, independence of the judiciary or independence of the FBI or CIA. And I'm here to tell you, I don't believe in it. I believe we're independent. We're the ones with the power. All of the government agencies and everybody in position is 100% dependent on the grant of authority that we give them through the Constitution and through the legislation. So the judiciary should be 100% dependent on the Constitution and the laws of the United States. Our problem is the judiciary thinks they're independent and that they're just up there inventing things. We saw that with Roe versus Wade, where they just invented a right to abortion that didn't exist. And we saw that a few years ago where they invented a constitutional right to same-sex marriage, overriding our constitutional amendment in Texas against same-sex marriage. So you have judges in black robes sitting in Washington, D.C., and thinking that that they're somehow like these dictators who can just invent something and call it a constitutional right. Well, the people never consented to that. There's a process for it. If they want to get 3/4 of the states to pass an amendment on same-sex marriage, then okay, then the people consented. But unless and until that happens, it was absolute tyranny for the United States Supreme Court to just take that issue from the voters. Just take it over. And so that's my guiding principle. I go by the Declaration and the Constitution and the statutes. Okay.
Fantastic. Yeah, good answer. All right, so and I know you're running in several different counties, but I want to talk about Montgomery County specifically in this one if we can. Montgomery County is known for its diversity. How do you plan to ensure that the court's decisions reflect and respect the diverse perspectives and the backgrounds of its residents?
Well, that just goes back to equal justice under the law. I believe that the courts should rule on the facts. They should apply the written words of the law to the established facts of the case without bias, prejudice, or influence in any way.
Okay.
And they should do so honestly and issue an opinion that's a well-reasoned opinion in language that people can understand, so that if they do lose a case, at least they can read the opinion and understand it and figure out, well, this is why I lost the case.
Right.
And I think that if courts would, if that was the, would focus more on that, there would be more respect for the courts, and the people would be less dissatisfied with the legal process. I know it's a long process and it takes time, and there's no magic wand on that. But when you're talking about this specifically, being fair to all demographics, I think when you're consistent and you're well-reasoned and you put it in language that people can understand and accept, then there's less distrust. I think far too often lately, especially, when I read an appellate opinion, especially like the United States Supreme Court, which is all Ivy League people,
Right.
they seem to pride themselves in how clever of a phrase they can use instead of just saying it like it is.
Yeah, they wordsmith it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so people read it and they're like, I don't understand this because I didn't go to Harvard or, whatever. I think that we ought to get back to, when you read an opinion that was issued by, the Texas Supreme Court back in 1892 or something, it's a little bit harder. It's a little hard to understand because they did talk different back then.
Right. Old
but
English.
For the most
bit.
part, they're just like, they don't go on and on with a bunch of flowery language, And I think we need to keep our appellate opinions, to the point and in a way that they can be understood by the public at large.
Okay. Yeah, I like that idea too.
Yeah.
Speaking engagements, what have you got going on in the next, let's just say, week or two, and you could just go with the highlights that you can read off the top of your head.
Off the top of my head, today's the 6th of
It is.
February.
Mm-hmm.
Tonight I'll be at a meet and greet for all the candidates in Liberty County. It's going to be in Dayton. Liberty County Republican Party's having a meet and greet for all their candidates. I think it's at 6 p.m. on the 6th. Tomorrow I've got a kind of a God's Digital Angels. I don't know if you're aware of them, but they've got a kind of a forum as well. The 8th, which is Thursday, I'll be in Hardin County at a candidate forum there. The 9th, we're having a campaign rally at the Panorama Clubhouse. Everybody's invited, and it's going to be at 5 o'clock on a Friday evening so that people can come by early, and if they want to go out after that, it'd be great, but we're having a campaign rally.
Great.
Next week, I've got candidate forums in Montgomery County, Jasper County, another one in Liberty County, another one in Montgomery County. It's
and are those listed on Facebook or
they
or the website or
Yes.
whatever? And you do have a Facebook page, I imagine?
I do.
Okay.
It's Kent Chambers Campaign on Facebook, and our website is kentchamberscampaign.com.
Okay, fantastic.
So, yeah.
All right.
We're out there. We're working hard.
And so how long are the terms? Is it a 2-year term or 4-year term?
6.
Six?
Yes. So there's 4 judges on the court.
Okay.
There's 6-year terms staggered.
Okay.
So the Chief Justice was elected in 2020. That was Scott Goldman. 2 years ago in 2022, Jay Wright was elected to the court. This year there's 2 spots open. One is Hollis Horton, who's retiring, and that's the position I'm running for. That's seat number 4. The other is Leanne Johnson, and she's running for re-election, but she has no opponent.
Okay.
But they're 6-year terms staggered.
Wow, 6 years. That's a good long time.
Yeah.
But I would imagine it would take that long just to, get in there and get used to what's going on. And
It promotes stability in the court system. If you had a turnover every 2 years,
yeah, it'd be tough.
You need a stable system. As impatient as we might get about reversing bad law, the ones that make the news are kind of a small percentage, right?
Right.
The court issues opinions on contracts, for example. That's an area where you need stability because you don't want a contract phrase or sentence or clause interpreted one way, and then 2 years later you throw out the judges and now they interpret that same clause a different way. So it promotes stability to have those longer terms.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
So I'm the average voter guy. Don't know a whole lot about the Court of Appeals. Don't know a whole lot about judges and all that. What would you say to the average voter guy to get them to vote for Kent Chambers?
Okay. Well, I have almost 35 years of experience, and we talked about that a little bit earlier. I'm pro-life.
Okay.
I'm pro-family. I think men are men and women are women. The law ought to respect their differences, but
So
treat
you're
them equally.
pro-biology?
Yeah, I'm pro-biology.
Okay.
I'm also pro-free speech, pro-First Amendment. I think that people ought to be able to use the words they want to use and say what's on their mind without being canceled or censored. I'm pro-Second Amendment.
Okay.
I believe the right in keep and bear arms is an individual right that we're all guaranteed in the Constitution. I'm pro-law enforcement. I think our law enforcement and firemen and first responders, we've got to, show them the utmost respect. It really saddens me and disappoints me how that has turned in the last few years against those guys when they're out on the front lines risking their lives. I grew up in a military household, so I'm very much in favor of the military, and that's kind of the police forces and sheriffs and constables are kind of along that same vein, so I can relate to them. So those are kind of my stances on those issues. We talked about my qualifications, but I want to say one other thing. And I know I've talked about several passages of Scripture, but part of my study and before I made the ultimate decision to run was I went back and looked in Exodus. Moses and the Israelites were at the bottom of Mount Sinai. And in Exodus 18, his father-in-law, Jethro, came and visited, and he watched Moses, and he said, "You're going to wear yourself out settling all the disputes between, the Israelites. You need to find men who are capable, who fear the Lord, who are trustworthy, and who hate dishonest gain." And we talked about my capabilities, and I'd put them up against anybody any day. But those other qualifications about fearing the Lord, knowing that you're accountable to a higher authority, and being trustworthy, and hating dishonest gain, that describes how I've lived my life. It describes how I've practiced law for the last 35 years. Like I said, I've tried a lot of cases and I've handled a lot of appeals. If you were to go find the people on the opposite side, my opponents, and say, did this guy play underhanded, dirty tricks on you? Was he dishonest?
Right.
You're not going to find anybody that's going to say that. It's a battle. Don't get me wrong.
I'm sure it is.
You kind of sometimes make people mad at you. But I don't think any of those guys could say I ever did anything dishonest. And so that's it. I mean, at the end of the day, an appeal is not an academic exercise. Yes, you have to read everything. You have to know the law. You have to research the law. And so in that sense, it can become an academic exercise to people. It will not become that to me because I know, because I've represented people and I know how it affects them and the things that they're worried about. Every one of those cases is somebody's life, somebody's family, somebody's assets. And to me, at the end of the day, when your case comes before the court, are you going to care how many appellate briefs that lawyer wrote? Because my opponent's written a lot of appellate briefs, more than I have. But at the end of the day, does that really matter to you? Or does it matter that you can trust the guy in the black robe on the bench to do the right thing every time and then give you a well-reasoned explanation for why he voted the way he did?
Written in layman's terms.
There
you go.
Yeah.
All right, Kent. Well, I appreciate you coming in. This was a good conversation. And I learned quite a lot about appellate law today. Stuff I didn't know. So, I mean, I think that's probably one of the best things that come about in these conversations that I have. I always pick up something and become a little bit smarter. So one of these days I'll have maybe a 50 or 60 IQ if I keep working on it. So
anything we can do to kind of remove the shroud of mystery behind the court system.
There you go.
We need to do.
Yeah, and there's definitely a shroud of mystery there.
Yeah.
So for most people at least. Okay, guys, well, there you have it, Kent Chambers. So look for his name on the ballot. He's going to be first on the ballot in this particular race. And be intelligent voters. Take a look, find out what your candidate's aims are, what their platform is, and vote along those lines. Don't just pick a name or a slogan. By doing so, we'll be able to right the ship and get it moving in the right direction once again. So I'm Hank Vatt. This is Hank's Think Tank. I appreciate your support. We'll see you in the next one.